Gone are the days when climate change was something abstract.
Right now, we're facing a man-made disaster of global scale, climate change.
Nowadays, you just need to monitor the unpredictable weather patterns for you to get a true picture of what I'm talking about.
Look at what's happening today. First, the rains came late. So that means that there's a potential that it might affect the onset of the long rain seasons in March. And when that happens, you disrupt the farming calendar.
Kenya, between 2001 to 2009, lost about 1.3 to 11 billion US dollars as a result of ecological degradation.
This week, we focus on climate change and the mitigation measures that corporates can embrace.
We've supported projects through the Green Guarantee Facility in about 7 countries. Kenya is one of them.
SME needs to change their way of doing things. They need to acquire the appropriate technology, green technology, for them to be competitive tomorrow.
Welcome to the program. My name is Elijah Mwangi. First things first, let's have a look at our fact sheet.
On our fact sheet today, we look at various multilateral environmental agreements and international treaties that Kenya is a party to. The 4 main multilateral agreements are United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, whose main goals are to conserve biodiversity, encourage sustainable use of biodiversity, and sharing of the benefits of genetic resources. United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was negotiated in Rio, Brazil in 1992. United Nations Convention on Combating Desertification and Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants that took effect in 2004. In addition, Kenya ratified the Paris Agreement that was reached during COP21 held in Paris, France in 2015. The following year, Kenya enacted the Climate Change Act, and at that point, it joined the League of Nations that had taken concrete steps to domesticate the Paris Accord on climate change. Kenya is a party to United Nations climate change conferences held annually to assess progress on climate change.
In my view, I think there is a certain value to these convenings, which basically underline our collective concern, our collective aspirations to basically cause some change to happen. But it is also at the heart of what is frustrating around global governance.
For the Chamwada Report, I'm Michael Zimaji.
World leaders have gathered in Katowice, Poland, for the ongoing 24th session of Conference of the Parties to the UN Convention on Climate Change, COP24. Key agenda to negotiate how to tackle climate change. And at this point, we want to bring that conversation closer home by asking, why should the climate change talks matter to us?
I think climate change must matter to Kenyans because it's an existential threat, and it affects just about every aspect of our lives, from the social, political, economic, ecological. And I think that the projections that have been put out by Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change through the series of assessment reports clearly indicates that we're highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change.
Here in Kenya, climate change is perhaps the most considerable environment challenge of our time. Dr. Richard Munang from UN Environment paints a picture of what Kenya has been losing due to climate change.
90% of agricultural production in Kenya is rain-fed, and therefore reduction in rainfall have direct impact on agricultural production. Kenya actually have reduction in rainfall by up to about 100 millimeters as compared to the mid-1970s. And what does this mean? It means that food security cannot be considered as a silo without taking into consideration water stress. Africa is losing 68 billion US dollars as a result of ecological degradation. That is almost about 186 million getting down the drain every day.
As global warming continues to be the key subject for discussion in COP24, Kenyans have a reason to be worried. This is because, just like other developing countries, Kenya is at the tipping point of global warming. Its high dependence on climate-sensitive agricultural production leaves it in a precarious position, and so far
we're not doing much. If you look at our transportation system, for instance, if you look at Nairobi, moving to cleaner energy, more efficient transport systems could actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions, especially CO2 emissions, for instance, and would make for cleaner, safer air for majority of Kenyans. But we're not doing much on that. I think part of the other questions that we need to start thinking about is deforestation, for instance. We've seen massive offtake of prime forest land over the last several decades. And a lot of those major disturbances on land are associated with significant carbon emissions that are coming from soil disturbances. And that's significant. So even on what we should be accountable for as a country, we're not doing a good job on that. And I think in many cases, we still believe that every effort that will go towards climate change will be underwritten by somebody else. And I think that is reckless and irresponsible.
As a result of global warming, an increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, such as droughts and floods, has hit many regions across the country.
If you look at, weather is just kind of the daily cycles of temperature, humidity, rainfall, wind, and all of that. But on the long term, these kind of long-term, large-scale changes in weather patterns over period of time then transitions into what we look at and consider as climate change. I think what we're seeing now, for instance, the rains that are pounding Nairobi now, over the last several years, the October, November, December rain should normally be kind of tapering off at this time of the year. But look at what's happening today. First, the rains came late. So that means that there's a potential that it might affect the onset of the long rain seasons in March, which should start March, April, May. So again, you may see a shift in that. And when that happens, you disrupt the farming calendar for many farming communities that depend on the timing of rains to kind of schedule their farm operations. So in many ways, then it starts to implicate just about everything.
Experts are now advocating for the use of renewable energy as a mitigation measure to combat adverse impacts of climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
I think there's a huge potential. If you look at geothermal resources, for instance, if you look at hydropower potential, for instance, if you look at wind power, for instance, if you look at solar energy, for instance, these are shamefully underexploited resources. And I think the government has not signaled with the right tax incentives and investment incentives to basically move the country on a path of a decarbonized economy. We're still overly dependent on fossil fuels, even in places where we shouldn't be. All our housing lighting should now be primarily driven by solar energy. But the government basically has to set that stage, of course in collaboration with the private sector, but those signals in terms of which direction to move the economy has to come from government, and in various ways of incentivizing this transition to a low carbon path.
Well put. Back to Katowice, the host of COP24. Many countries with emerging economies appear committed to fighting climate change, but very few countries are on track to meet their goals.
Right now, we're facing a man-made disaster of global scale. Our greatest threat in thousands of years, climate change. If we don't take action, the collapse of our civilizations and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon. The United Nations provides a unique platform that can unite the whole world. And as the Paris Agreement proved, together we can make real change happen.
In this year's Climate Change Performance Index, no country performed well enough to reach the very high ranking, that is, doing enough to keep temperatures within 1.5 degrees Celsius of pre-industrial levels. Indeed, climate change is real. At this point, we take a short break, but when we return, we look at the roles that corporates can play in mitigating climate change. Wait, is it trees that bring rain or rain that makes the trees grow? As you think about that, the fact is that trees, or rather forests, form an important feature of any ecosystem. And on this second part of the show, we want to look at the roles that corporates can play in mitigating climate change with a case study of African Guarantee Fund. Kenya's rich flora and fauna is arguably one of the most valuable assets that the country has. Mark you, trees play a pivotal role in providing sources of clean water, habitats for biodiversity, and mitigating climate change effects, among other benefits. This is Keraita Forest in Kiambu County, and just like other forests in Kenya, the number of indigenous species of trees and animals here are dwindling. And that's why on this particular day, African Guarantee Fund is keen on saving the forest, which forms part of the Aberdare Forest Range, where a lot of conservation efforts are being carried out. Attended by more than 300 people, the planters, including some of the AGF partner financial institutions, planted more than 10,000 trees. Speaking at the event, AGF CEO Felix Bigpaw noted that an increasing number of SMEs have ventured into businesses that tackle climate change.
Kenya is a country recognized worldwide as a green country. We want to keep it like that for the other country to come, watch, and transfer the success. We believe that SME needs to change their way of doing things. They need to acquire the appropriate technology, green technology, for them to be competitive tomorrow. That's why we create a green guarantee facility to help the SMEs that wants to go to this sector, to this direction, to access easily to finance. Today is almost 20% of our portfolio, and it keeps growing within the continent.
Well, during the exercise, corporates seemed to agree on the fact that climate change is real and it's man-made.
Every other transaction that we do as a bank, we're obligated by the natural environmental standards and laws that are around it. So we must make sure each and every transaction that happens or comes through the bank meets certain standards. Like, for example, we can't support a customer who is doing deforestation because it is illegal. So as much as it may make an economic sense from the customer because he could be cutting trees and selling, but that is not economically viable and is not a transaction we would be able to support.
We've got even policies within our credit analysis and the facilities that we give that requires that the customers that we finance meet some of these environmental threshold. They've got the requisite regulations, licenses in place. If it is in energy, are you having energy regulatory authorities licenses? If you are setting up premises or enterprises somewhere, do we have NEMA's authority and such like? So we are keen to ensure that we have a sustainable environment.
Keraita Forest is one of the 6 major forests in Kiambu County. Unfortunately, they have all been reported in recent years to be under threat from illegal loggers, in what contributes to the diminishing of forest cover in the country, a major threat to climate change.
We have a lot of demand for the forest products. We have grazing, and there's competition between trees, growing trees and grazing, but that is being addressed by the Kenya Forest Service. We also have a little bit, initially we used to have poaching, but in terms of tree poaching, not animal, but that has been contained. Also charcoal burning, but that has also been contained. The main, again, challenge is that the resources in terms of allocation of resources by the national government is quite, I would say, is meager.
According to experts, Kenya is yet to achieve United Nations recommended 10% forest cover.
We need also to look at alternative sources of energy. As we drive the course of issues of charcoal, we need also to relook at what option are you giving these people. Number one is we need to draw a triangle, whereby this triangle, on the top of it, is of course to make sure that there is no more destruction of forests. The down part of it is you need to look at the issues of forest, increasing the forest cover by topping up with more trees and all that.
Indiscriminate cutting of trees in river catchments in Kenya's water towers has seen receding river discharge and reduced water volumes in generating dams.
We need to change from tree planting to tree growing. Tree growing and start rewarding people for the trees that has been sustained. So if the government intends to put 5 million in tree growing, they should not go and buy seedlings. They should come to my farm, if I'm a private entity, and do a baseline and find out that this place is empty. Then after 1 year, come back. If I planted 10 trees, divide that 5 million into the seedlings that are there, or whatever arrangement we have done, so that it's a rewarding system. And government has been using a lot of money, because you've been seeing tree seedlings piled in schools, tree seedlings, and nobody's keen on their growing.
The story of climate change may not be new to many, but it's interesting to see how organizations are coming up with new strategies to tackle the challenge. One of such strategy is the Green Facility by African Guarantee Fund. Now, I'm meant to understand that after COP21, Green Facility was born. What is Green Facility all about?
We know the green concept has been going on for a while, and globally, internationally, there's been a lot of campaign to bring awareness about the climate change and the negative effects of climate change and what needs to be done. Now, taking cue from this, then AGF decided to partner with the Nordic Development Fund to develop a green guarantee facility that is really an instrument, a financial instrument, and a risk management tool that we use to support the various green investments, green initiatives that are available in the market, basically to address the wider or broader issues or consequences that are related to climate change effects. Today, we have, with the support of the Nordic Development Fund, we have managed to issue guarantees, green guarantees, of up to around $20 million US across Africa. And this is towards about 7 countries today in Africa. And we've seen these support a number of projects within the renewable energy segment largely. And these have enabled about 80,000 households today to be connected to renewable energy. And of course, assisted in avoiding about 1.6 million tons of carbon emissions.
Paint a picture of the opportunities that are there in the green sector.
Right. Kenya, I mentioned earlier that we have projects, we've supported projects through the Green Guarantee Facility in about 7 countries. Kenya is one of them. And actually, Kenya has the largest component. About 40% of that, of what we have issued, the guarantees we've issued, are actually in Kenya. And the rest are shared, 60% is shared amongst the other countries. You realize that even on a general basis, in terms of green finance or climate change initiatives, Kenya has really taken a lead, because we've seen more and more development partners or impact funds focusing in East Africa, but largely in Kenya. We have people like CIMA, that we are working with, who are focused in developing East Africa, but have supported key projects in Kenya. We have other renewable energy investors who are also doing in their own ways the small household projects, what you call pay-to-go systems, what you call the mini grids, and these are happening in Kenya. So Kenya as a whole has taken a lead, and with the enhanced capacity from Nordic Development Fund, we see more and more support for Kenya in the green guarantee space.
And what is the connection of the green facility that you have with the COP24?
Climate change, from a consumer perspective, climate change really affects the private sector, and you find in developing countries, 90% of the private sector is SMEs. So the SME really space is a key tool in terms of addressing climate change effects. And having realized that, then AGF through the Green Guarantee Facility is partnering with financial institutions who have for a long while held a certain risk perception towards the SME space, seeing them as being a very high risk segment. Now, to make it worse now is even that we are seeking to have the same financial institutions and banks to now lend to green investments or SMEs that are engaged in investing in green projects. Now this is even more, they see this as even more riskier. Now with our guarantee, we share the risk, and we are trying to encourage them to get out of this perception and catalyze the lending towards this segment.
What are some of the challenges that you can cite that the SMEs in the green sector do encounter?
You find that the challenge with financing or green finance within the SME space, in the financial institution context, is one, there is a mismatch of tenors, really, you can say, in terms of lending, because some of these projects that the SMEs engage in are long-term in nature, and some of them require long-term financing, which is really, our financial institutions don't easily come by long-term finance, especially for SME segment.
Well, very interesting to see how corporates are coming up with innovative ways geared towards mitigating climate change. And that marks the end of our show. My name is Elijah Mwangi, and on behalf of the entire Chams Media crew that has made this production a success, thank you so much for watching, and see you again next week.